So I figured I'd record this and do what I know of myself to do, which is just read. Right now I'm reading Live Wired by David Eagleman. Just see how this goes. Right now I'm kind of interested in this chapter about why is it harder to teach old dogs new tricks, and I guess the whole idea being that as we get older our brains end up becoming less plastic. And so I'm curious as to whether or not we can actually do something about that, because I feel like everybody wants to become younger and go ahead and make their brains a lot more plastic so that we can learn more. And I actually already read this chapter 9, but there were some things that just stood out to me so well. And so as it starts off with talking about World War II and how there were people who got brain injuries, obviously, but those who got brain injuries a lot sooner in their life. So I'm 22. If I were to get a brain injury compared to somebody that of 40 years of age, obviously because my brain is more plastic, I have the ability to recuperate a lot better. And to me, that didn't do anything to my fears. I just kind of said, okay, well then, as we get older, the more dumber we get. That's kind of what I assumed. But then it went on to talk about these nuns, and this was particularly interesting to me. See if I can find it here. Basically, the idea was that these nuns wanted to go ahead and give their brain away to get it studied after their death. So upon their death, they go ahead and give their brains away to research. And a few of those nuns that died, and mostly, they died mostly because of age, had Alzheimer's. But the interesting thing was that for the majority of them, I guess it might have been through their religious beliefs that they kept their day in a constant sort of constantly going and doing different things. Whereas, you see some old people become, I don't want to say it, but let's call it for what it is, couch potatoes, in front of a TV. But what they found in their minds was that because they were constantly doing things that were cognitively, I don't want to say challenging, but enough to ensue growth, they found that as much as the Alzheimer's ends up killing off the neural pathways, the physical neural pathways within your brain, they were still creating new neural pathways, even though, regardless that they had Alzheimer's, which was particularly interesting. And so now actually on this page is perfect, because what they talk about is, my parents are leaving. Give it a minute here. You might hear the garage door open in just a second. So I'll talk, but if I get abrupted by the garage door, please understand why. I'm still anticipating the garage door, but I'm going to try not to. And so the new problem that came up was now, okay, it's clear that our brains end up dying out eventually. And that fear of mine was, how should I put it? Let's just say it didn't help my fear at all of dying out as a cognitively unstable person. But it did definitely tell me that there is something that could be done in terms of that. Even with age, does your plasticity rate go down? Yes. But I don't think that equates the same to, or it doesn't, it misses the fact that your brain plasticity is still there at an older age. It would just take more effort to go ahead and change things in terms of whether it be habits and just anything regarding brain plasticity. And so what they compared it to was the Roman Empire, I believe. I have to find the actual chapter, so give me like 2 seconds here. In this same way, the brain's solidification reflects its success in understanding the world. Neural networks lock themselves more deeply into place not because of fading function, but instead because they have had success in figuring things out. So would you really want the plasticity of a child again? Although having a sponge-like brain that absorbs everything sounds appealing, the game of life is largely about figuring out the rules. What we lose in modifiability, we gain in expertise. Our hard-won networks in association may not be fully correct or even internally consistent, but they add up to life experience, know-how, and an approach to the world. A child simply does not have the capacity to run a company, enjoy deep ideas, or lead a nation. In other words, if I were a baby with the plasticity that I wish I had, or even as a 10-year-old, for me to be able to think this deeply, have the consciousness to be able to decide to put this on camera or record this in general, would not be there. Whoa. If plasticity didn't decline, you would not lock down the conventions of the world. You'd never get good pattern recognition or the capacity to navigate a social life. You wouldn't be able to read a book, hold a meaningful conversation, ride a bike, or get food for yourself. Yeah, I like to go ahead and choose what food I like. Preserving total flexibility would retain the helplessness of an infant. And what about the memories of your life? Imagine you could swallow a capsule that would renew your brain plasticity. And this is kind of what I originally hoped for prior to reading this. This would give you the capacity to reprogram your neural networks to learn new languages rapidly and adopt new accents and new views of physics. The cost is that you'd forget what came before. Your memories of your childhood would be erased and overwritten. Your first lover, your first trip to Disneyland, your interaction with your parents, all would fade like a dream after waking. Would it be worth it to you? That really put the nail in the coffin for me. It's like, I mean, it truly does prove to me, and I've always kind of wondered this, you know, the more, there's always a give and take, you know. And so although we do ahead and we become more intelligent, does it come at the cost of plasticity, right? Of course it does. But that can be viewed as both a positive and a negative exchange. So the best thing that we can do is to remember what we got. And then it describes a horror scenario actually about, and this kind of I could never think of having more brain plasticity as a negative aspect until I read this. And this to me, it sort of put it in a negative aspect, but I thought, okay, well, even if you take it in small dosages of this so-called pill that gives you better brain plasticity, technically there would still be some good, right? But then if this pill were to be developed, that would mean that the world in general has the capability to manipulate brain plasticity externally for people, right? And then it goes on to this horror scenario about the future of warfare is to imagine a biological weapon that implements plasticity again. No one is physically hurt, but the troops are propelled back to the state of infants. They forget their ability to walk and to talk. All of the memories are wiped. When they are returned home by their commanders, they hold no remembrance of their families, friends, spouses, or children. Technically, they are fine, they can still learn again, and nothing is damaged. Only their mental lives, the part we cannot easily see, have had a factory reset back to their original state. This scene is so horrific because fundamentally, who you are is the sum total of your memory. We turn to that now. And it also describes in this chapter that you'll recognize when you were probably a lot younger, the memories that stood out were only the memories that were unconventionally different from your normal day-to-day routine. It is hard, it becomes harder and harder to remember your memories the farther you go back into your own timeline, which I find to be quite interesting. And it just so happens that the time at which your brain is rated or has the highest rated plasticity amount or rate, is a lot closer to infantry, when you were that of an infant, So yeah. And so actually this chapter, I kind of skipped ahead because originally what I was reading about was our ability to cognitively enhance ourselves and the idea of cortical territory, I believe is what they called it. And the basic idea being that, okay, for people that are blind, for people that they have a disability that disables them from using a particular sensor, we now have the capability to enhance that sensory ability. And the way we do that is by giving them devices that fulfills a disconnect between the brain and whatever that sensory may be. So take, for example, Braille, right? Visually, your mind can't see anything. And that in itself is an issue because now the territory within your brain, whatever territory within your brain, is no longer being exercised. And so your brain tries to find new ways of fulfilling that. And one of the ways that it does that actually is by dreaming, right? We see things visually, and the idea is that the brain is trying to prevent your body's visual cognitive function from depreciating over time. And so what it does is it fights for the territory within your brain. And so when we dream, because we can visually see things, it is basically a practice for our brain to continue to maintain that territory of visual capability. Now, when somebody goes blind or has any disability in any sensory, let's say category, function, you're gonna lose that ability. And so if we take something like Braille, for example, it is kind of similar to dreaming in the sense that you are able to touch something and your brain will use your touch sensor as a means of fulfilling a visual cognitive practice. And so what happens now is that by you touching something, you are able to still utilize that visual territory within your brain cognitively. And so how this comes full circle back to enhancing capabilities is that actually they had one chapter where I just read, and they had somebody put magnets on their fingers, on the tip of their fingers. And this guy was a biohacker, I believe is what they call them. And the idea was that he could sense magnetic fields now. There was another person who also had an ultraviolet detector, as well as an infrared. I can't exactly remember. And he changed something within his eye. He got some sort of surgery that enabled him to see or get a sense of ultraviolet and infrared light. And over time, your body obviously has to get used to these sensations, but over time, they were able to develop unhuman-like abilities to see things that normal humans simply cannot. And so that's how this originally started. So yeah, we're gonna keep going on with the book. If there's anything interesting, it'll be interesting to sort of think it out loud, like how I'm doing now. And I'm not too sure how this will end up, but it'll be interesting to find out. I'm not too sure if it's better to just read out loud and then say my thoughts as I continue reading and when they come up, or read first and then go ahead and sort of read particular things that stood out to me and just kind of drift away with my thoughts as I do that. But you guys let me know on that. I'm all open ears. So yeah, Live Wire, pretty good book.